It all started on a sunny day in college. I had just finished my last class and was excited to get back to my dorm room. Once I arrived back in my dorm, I quickly got on my computer. I was anxious to see what new websites awaited me. A while back, my brother had sort of joined me up to a dark web mailing list where people would send me interesting sites they found. He was a complete computer genius. From software encoding to Photoshop and video making, he was a wizard with all of it. One day I received a message from an unknown user. It said, "Chat to real people from the past." I thought it could be fun, so I clicked on it. The web page loaded, and there was nothing on the screen besides a chat box and a button to search for a new person to talk to. I clicked on the button to find a new person to chat with, and it took some time, but eventually I connected with somebody. There was no text or anything. Then, all of a sudden, I received a message. It read, "Dear friend, I am writing this internet mail to anyone who cares to read it. I am soon to be a father to twins. I hope this mail reaches you in good condition. We're off to see the new Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, at the theater to celebrate." New Star Wars. That movie was over 30 years old at this point. This had to be some kind of lame joke, I thought to myself. There was no way a guy in the 1980s was communicating with me. I decided to play along and thought it was all in good fun. "Yeah, I wouldn't call that movie new. I watched that when I was a kid." He replied saying, "What are you talking about? The opening night is tonight. You must be thinking of a different movie, unless you live abroad and it came out early there." "No. I'm a college kid in America," I replied. I went on to list every Star Wars movie and TV show that exists since then. "I think you have a very strong imagination," the guy replied. He wrote a long message telling me that they only have plans for a certain amount of movies and that he knows his stuff. He reminded me of my dad. He was a major Star Wars fan. I was fully indulged with the time travel role play and told him that I knew a massive spoiler for The Empire Strikes Back. I was respectful enough to ask him if he wanted to hear it, and he confidently replied, challenging me to spoil it for him. "If you've seen the movie, you know which one I'm talking about." He laughed and told me that's impossible, and mentioned that he was heading off to the theater. He stopped replying at this point, so I assumed that the fun little role play was over. It was quite wholesome, and the guy really played the part well, speaking like someone who'd only just figured out what email was and with a polite tone throughout. I went about my day, probably studied a bit less than I should have, and had a small chat with my brother. I told him about the guy from the 80s, and he laughed and told me he'll have to check that website out. He was much more nerdy, and he was really into all that stuff. He was a bit on the antisocial side, so the dark web was his happy place. Hours later, I heard a ding. I'd left the website open without noticing. The 80s guy had actually replied. He was going crazy, asking me how I knew about the big spoiler, and speculating that I must have had early access or worked on the film. We had a further back and forth about how I lived in 2023, and I really played into the part about being in the future, teasing him about the technology we have here. Part of me enjoyed the role play, even though that usually wasn't my thing. He asked for my name, but I was smart enough not to give someone on the dark web any details about myself. So I asked what he was called, and I felt my stomach twist when he told me. Alfie Rogers. This was suddenly not a very fun conversation. That was my dad's name. This person obviously had information on me. They must have pinged my IP address, found out my name, and did some basic background research on Ancestry.com and all those other websites that exist nowadays. Alright, you know my dad's name, this isn't funny. What do you want? I asked him, knowing that this kind of thing usually turns into a blackmail attempt or a twisted game. What do you mean? He replied. Still deep in the role play. There's no way that you just pulled out a random name, and it happened to be my dad's name, so you know who I am. What do you want? Even as I called him out, he still didn't budge. He confidently asserted that he was called Alfie Rogers and that he was living in the 1980s. He started to list a bunch of personal details to prove he was a real person. He knew where my dad was born, where his parents came from, my mother's name, her parents, the car he had, everything. It was really disturbing. I'm pretty good with computers, so I know just how much information you can get from historical online records, but this was impressively creepy. Whoever it was, they were really good at this, and they must have planned this for some time. I thought about a question I could ask him, something only my dad could really answer. I found the perfect question. We had an old dog when I was a kid, and unfortunately we had no photos of her. Nobody else would know about this dog. There's absolutely no way it was on any database. So I asked him, "Who is Poppy?" "Poppy. That's my dog." "How did you know the name of my dog?" "She's a border collie. She's sat with me right now." "That's creepy. How did you do that?" I started freaking out. I don't believe in stuff like this, in time travel or having conversations with the past, but whoever this man was had too much information about my family history. It just didn't make sense. He answered every question I threw at him. I think I spent hours quizzing him on his entire life and eventually accepting that whoever or whatever this person was, I felt like I was talking to my dad when he was my age. I'd settle past the discomfort, enjoying every moment of this conversation. Though I did ask one thing from him. If he really did exist in the past, and he really was my dad, then I wanted him to take some pictures of Poppy. He laughed and told me he'd get right on it. He told me he had to get going, and that he loves how clever computers are. I don't think he fully grasped the situation, but he happily played along as if he was talking to his real son. I asked him to tell Poppy I miss her, and even though I highly suspected that this was some strange AI or a wholesome role player, I told him I loved him. Funnily enough, he replied saying that he loved me, and finished with, "Can't wait to meet you." Then we ended the conversation. A few weeks passed. I truly felt the happiest that I'd been in a long time. It had been hard living without a dad. He had a heart attack a year before I left for college. But that conversation really gave me a feeling of closure. I felt like I'd navigated my grief and allowed myself to start healing. I'd occasionally check back on that website but never saw anything from him. I suppose it was a one-off thing. Over the next few months I started to think about that conversation less and really started to live my life again. It was Christmas time and I went back home to visit family. It was the second Christmas without him, and the lack of his presence was still heavily evident, but we enjoyed the holiday and I enjoyed seeing my mom and my brother. On the last night before I returned to college, my mom remembered that she had something for me. She brought me an old VHS. It was Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. I knew what a VHS was, but they'd been extinct for about 20 years, so I wasn't sure why she was giving it to me. "Open it," she said. I pried open the clunky case and looked inside. Well, shit. There was a whole collection of photos of Poppy, dozens of them. Posing with the whole family, including me and my brother when we were just babies. There were some photos of my dad posing with the dog too. It was surreal, and I was too emotional to think about how these had come to be. There was a note attached. "For my brilliant children, may the force be with you." He was always a bit of a dork. My mom said to me, "I thought we didn't have any photos of Poppy. I don't even remember your dad taking these." A glimpse of happiness and nostalgia was noticeable in her voice. "But your brother found them a few weeks ago." I gave her a big hug and went to find my brother. I told him how great it was that he found them and started to look through them. I told him all about the website and the man from the past who claimed to be my dad, and that we even had a conversation about him taking photos of the dog. He was happy to listen and go through the photos with me, but he was his usual quiet self and didn't have much to say other than a few positive comments on the photos. He hadn't been the same since he passed. But it was nice to see him with a smile for the first time in a while. So that's my story about my time-traveling conversation with my dad. Sometimes it completely freaks me out, and I stay up all night thinking about it. Other times, I just feel comfortable knowing that something beyond my comprehension happened to me. Whether it was an incredibly talented hacker or a crazy AI, I don't know. But I tend to avoid the dark web now. I think I got lucky with this encounter. It was only a matter of time before I met someone who would use that information for the wrong reasons. I have some of my own theories about that story, but I want to hear yours in the comments. If you're enjoying so far, please remember to like the video. Okay, so before I start, this was many years ago and I don't do this kind of thing anymore. I was young and naive and I wanted to impress a girl I liked. For legal reasons, this whole story is completely made up. I was in my early 20s and I'd started hanging out with a group of people that party pretty hard. They did all sorts of drugs that I shall not mention here. I did my best to keep away from that stuff, but I may or may not have joined it a few times. My life was a bit of a mess at the time. I won't make too many excuses about why I was hanging out with these people, but one of the reasons I stuck around for so long was this girl. At the time, she was exactly my type. She had long hair and she was playful and flirty. She was pretty much my dream girl. We got chatting and I asked her to hang out sometime and she actually agreed. I couldn't believe it. A few days before she was supposed to come and chill, she messaged me asking if I had any of that good green stuff. I didn't smoke on my own, only in social situations that made it a necessity. But instead of saying this, I just lied and said of course I have some. Suddenly, I'm panicking, contacting everyone I know about getting some grass. Nobody could help, and I was desperate. So, I did the dumbest thing I could think of. I went to the dark web. I got myself a virtual private network to stay anonymous and went searching for a way in. After a bit of digging and asking around, I found a link that supposedly led to a dark web marketplace. My heart was pounding as I clicked on that link. The website had a sketchy vibe, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen on the regular web. No flashy ads, no social media links, just a simple page with a list of products. I went through the listings until I found what I wanted. I messaged the seller and worked up the details. Paying for it wasn't as easy as clicking one button, like you can on Amazon. They wanted cryptocurrency, so I had to figure out how to get my hands on some. It was a bit of a headache and cost me $50 for something that should have cost about $20, but I managed to get it sorted. A few days later, a small package arrived. My heart was racing as I opened it. But instead of what I ordered, it was just some random junk. I had been scammed. Panic set in as I realized I was in way over my head. Soon after, I started getting threatening emails from an anonymous sender. They knew what I'd been up to and were demanding more money, or they'd expose my activities to the authorities. I was trapped in a twisted game of blackmail. Every knock on my door made me jump. I desperately tried to figure a way out of this mess. I was stuck in a dark web nightmare of my own making, and I couldn't see a way to escape it. Call me an idiot, because I really am, but I sent the anonymous blackmailers around $600 in total, about $100 every week. They just keep coming back and blackmailing me, and I kept paying until eventually I just said screw it and stopped sending them anything. I lived in complete fear for months afterwards, thinking that the FBI were going to break down my door and arrest me. Looking back, it was pretty ridiculous. Nobody cares about a guy buying a tiny amount of green stuff on the internet, but my head wasn't quite right. The worst part is that the girl I liked didn't even care. She came over and we had a great night and she didn't even ask about it. So, if there's a moral to the story, other than avoiding the dark web, I'd say don't do drugs just to impress someone. And don't send $600 to people blackmailing you over a misdemeanor. The next story has references to a guy watching some adult videos. The story is worth sharing, but I can't find any visual way of telling this story that would be appropriate, so you get to enjoy a late night drive. All the language is as family-friendly as I could make it. This is a pretty short story, but it's true, so I'll tell it exactly as it happened. At the time I was a 23-year-old man. I had a history of using the dark web, browsing random sites, ordering some stuff, never really had any issues. I will mention though, that I used literally no programs or filters to protect me. I just went in deep and assumed that my antivirus would protect me from any harm. Ladies, cover your ears for this next part. Unlike other young men, I would watch adult content, and one night while I was feeling particularly lonely, I found some videos that I wouldn't watch with my parents. I sat in front of my laptop and did my business. 2 nights later, I get an email. Weirdly, it said that it was sent by my own email address. I hadn't seen anything like that before. I click on it straight away and I can't describe the feeling that hit me. There was a video attached, and it was me, in my birthday suit, furiously playing rock, paper, scissors in my lap. You could see everything, including my face at some point in the video when I adjust my seat. So there was no denying who it was. The email listed a bunch of demands: go online and buy some Bitcoin or gift cards and send them to him. Or the video of me sinning would be sent to my family. The blackmailer had the decency to list the names of my family members, just in case I thought he was bluffing. He gave me a time limit of 48 hours, and pointed out that he could see that I'd opened the email because he was in my computer, and threatened that if I contact the authorities or start searching about how to deal with this situation, that he would release it all. Call me crazy, but I thought about it for a few hours and decided my dignity was too expensive. I wasn't going to pay someone to hide the fact that I do something that almost every other adult in the world does. I called his bluff and got my friend over to help me clear any viruses from my laptop. He thinks he found how they access my webcam, but we couldn't be sure, so I always have it turned off on the settings, as well as putting a sticker over it. I messaged everyone on the list that he sent me, telling them that they might receive a video of me, and explained the situation. They all just laughed and told me I was gross. The blackmail guy never did send the video as far as I know. But I learned my lesson about taking online privacy a bit more seriously.